He paid for all of the sins, for all of the people, for all of time.
You know, it doesn't take a double doctoral or a master's work. I'm not poking fun at anybody. Be who God created you to be, please.
Always boils down to our relationship with Jesus. That relationship affects everything in our lives.
God chose Israel. Our founding fathers chose God.
Be a doer of the word. Because faith without works is dead. For real. That's religion. That's knowledge. That's intellect.
You need to go out there and engage with your world and own your liberty.
All right, so first of all, I need to roll up my sleeves because this is a question of boredom in a lot of ways. This is one of the most boring things in theology is working through what we're going to work through today. But I say that obviously with some reserve because the Holy Spirit in the Bible is not boring in any way. The problem is that this is what man has done with the pages of the Bible. And that's why it's boring. That's why I really don't have a lot of room for it. So even though I'm a theologian, I would caution people to be careful of theology and stick to the text of the Bible. And so with that being said, I want to introduce to you what Reformed theology and Calvinism is. Now, I personally have a lot of friends that fall into a Reformed camp, and you're just going to have to be slow. I'm going to get to what all this stuff means, but just take it one step at a time. I have a lot of friends that thoroughly believe in this systematic approach to the way that you understand the Bible. Really good friends. In fact, one of my lifetime best friends has gone all the way through the Reformed seminaries, and he's still one of my best friends in life. I mean, we don't see eye to eye at all theologically, but we haven't let that get in the way. And so I also just want to say that some of these Reformed brothers and sisters are part of a God-honoring movement that I truly believe that has detested sin, it's preached Christ, it's believed that God is sovereign in every way and has put the work of grace on a very high pedestal. And all of those things are really good things. All of those things should be honored. And so I want to say when I come together with them, what we do is we stay unified in what we can believe and agree on. And I don't want to say we don't talk about the other stuff, but we have different understandings of it. So what it is it's an interpretation of the Bible. And so when you get into Reformed theology, it sort of connects with a whole bunch of different things. And this is why sometimes I say, you really either need to be reformed or not. Being stuck somewhere in the middle, you're going to find yourself kind of being conflated, trying to figure it out. And so typically if you're reformed, you're going to take on things like penal substitutionary atonement, ransom debt theories. Those are on the atonement wing, there's 8 different versions of atonement, and those are the more reformed versions of it. You're also definitely probably going to be, in your view of hell, like an eternal conscious torment person, meaning the traditional view of hell that you've always learned of when somebody dies, they're basically cast into a lake of fire and they are forever going to go through a torturous, enduring, non-ending death forever and ever. There's also predestination. So I'm going to get into some of these things. Now, what I'm going to say is whether you understand it or not, everybody in the room, hold on, raise your hand, everybody in the room. Whether you realize it or not, you're all a little bit of a Calvinist. All right, you can put your hands down. Everybody in the room, even myself, I would have to say. And so this is hard because when you look at what Calvinists believe, we're all going to believe some part of what a Calvinist is. But the problem is when you take on too much of those kind of things, you might be a Calvinist if you are a Calvinist. So that's where you kind of have to figure out, like, where am I on this spectrum? And so with anything, I'm going to try to identify today some of the ways that you can recognize this. And again, I don't want you to look at Reformed theology or Calvinism, and I'm going to tell you the difference between those in a second. But I don't want you to look at them as evil. I want you to look at them as an option within evangelical Christianity. Now, by the end of this, you're going to find out that I do not hold to Reformed theology. Your pastor doesn't hold to Reformed theology. The great majority of Spirit-led churches don't hold to Reformed theology. And I think I'm going to show that to you. Now, there are a few, but it's very, very rare that you would take a Reformed view at a Spirit-led, charismatic, Pentecostal congregation. Now, there are good views, so you can have a Reformed theology. In fact, I just wrote a long article on what I'm preaching about today. So some of you got tipped off to this in the last day if you are following my Expedition 44 blog articles. You get a little notification. Dr. Ryan just wrote something, and so some of you, there's a few people in the room that actually sent me messages in the last couple days. Hey, is this what you're preaching on this weekend? So those of you who got tipped off, you've already done a little bit of your homework in reading that. Those of you who didn't, you're going to be able to get that link shared. It has a lot more than what I'm talking about today. There are good views within Reformed theology. So two of my best friends in life, guys that I talk to almost every day, are both very much into Reformed theology. They've spent their life working through it, and that's where they landed. Now, neither one of them are Spirit-filled Christians, and that might influence that a little bit because every single theological thing sort of points to how you interpret a few major things, and that's what we're going to get into today. So you might want to take notes. Normally I don't have you guys take notes. There is an article, like I said, that I'm going to share with you, but this is what we're going to figure out and work through today. So this is difficult because Reformed theology basically is a huge camp. It's a huge camp that's going to interpret salvation in 5 major ways. There's going to be differences within Reformed thinking. Some people that agree with others that are Reformed and some people that don't. Calvinism is sort of a version of Reformed theology that is going to particularly take the extreme views of Reformed theology and hold to those. Now, you might have heard somebody say, well, I'm only a 3-point Calvinist. It's kind of a laughing thing because what that's referring to is the acronym TULIP, when I'll get to, where they adhere to like 3 of the major 5 pillars of Calvinism. So a true Calvinist would say, well, if you only call yourself a 3-point Calvinist, then you're not really a Calvinist. You're just into Reformed theology. Where a Reformed theologian, or somebody like me that's not a Reformed theologian but interpreting all of these things, would just say they're all Calvinists. If you adhere to 1 or 2 or 3 of those points, then guess what? You might be a Calvinist if you believe any of those points. So there's not a clear way to do this. It's kind of like saying, do you think that all Southern Baptists agree on their theology? If we could put 20 Southern Baptist pastors up here on the thing and ask them, do you all agree on this, and go through 100 points, would they all agree? No, they would all have different ideas. And so that's sort of what you get with the Reformed faith. There's a lot of different thoughts. But the problem or the difference is if you consider yourself a Calvinist, you're going to understand a few things that it's hard to get out of. And so That's what I would kind of call a pillar of your theology. Is there another word? So I'm not a Calvinist. I'm not into Reformed theology. Then what does that make me? Is there a title for somebody that's on the other side of the fence of Calvinism or Reformed theology? There really isn't. For instance, you often hear of people say, well, I'm not Calvinist, I'm Arminian. Well, actually, Arminian is a lot closer to Calvinism than I would be. So you kind of have a 5-point Calvinist over here, then you have like the Arminians, then monergism is somewhere in here. This is where most of the evangelical churches hang out. Then the Spirit-led world goes from about this point all the way over to here. And so what do you call the people like Beloved Church that are typically wheels-off, Spirit-filled people all the way over here? There isn't a name for you. Sorry. Yeah, there's, and I love that we're not labeled for once. Thank God we don't have a label, right? But the thing that most people agreed on is that we believe in free will. And that's where it really lands. So if I'm not a Calvinist or if I'm not a Reformed person, I might say that I'm a free will theologian. I am ordained first in the Baptist camp. Believe it or not, it's the same as the Southern Baptists. And there are Reformed versions of Southern Baptists. And then there's what I am, which is called a free will Baptist. And so that's how I was originally ordained. And still today, I would fall in line in theology with a lot of what they do. You've probably never heard of a free will Baptist before, but they believe in things like that the Last Supper was intended to be a fellowship together, a koinonia, rather than just little cups. And so if you go there, they do things like hang out with each other all day long. You might be Free Will Baptist if you hang out and actually eat food rather than pass little wrappers and candy and things. The other thing is foot washing. Anybody had their feet washed before? Yeah. Pretty amazing. I think you guys do this regularly, beloved. So again, you might be Free Will. I'm just kidding. You're not really Free Will Baptists. I'm not sure what you are. But you're probably on, yeah, you're awesome. I like that. But you're probably on the free will side of the fence right there with me. So as we go through this, the majority of you are going to kind of land where I and your pastor, and just so you know, your pastor and I pretty much are like 99% on everything I'm talking about today. We don't, and that was even before we met, we were like 99. That might even be what brought us together, to be quite honest, is that our theology was already in line with each other. Now, this is rare for me because normally I'm an exegesis guy. When Pastor Bob was talking, I had my Greek interlinear open in Psalm, and I was, going through, looking at every single word. And we're going to do a tiny little bit of that today, but I'm sort of out of my comfort zone in that that's not all we're doing today. This is really what I'm going to call a logical, philosophical, ontological, or theological. Is that enough? Jickles? It's a coffee side conversation of what this looks like. Now, do you really need to know anything about this? Do you really need to understand what Reformed theology and Calvinism is? You don't really need to. You can just continue what you're doing, trust the Lord, call on the Holy Spirit, surround yourself with good teaching, people that are going to lift you up, and you're gonna be okay. But one of the things about being a wheels-off, Spirit-led Christian is being able to discern when things don't sound okay. When things just don't seem like that's really what God wants of you or what the Bible says. And I'm going to say that Reformed theology, in my opinion, and again, this is just my opinion, sometimes gets the train off the track. And so that's my consideration. And so let's jump into this. Let's talk about exactly what Reformed theology is. So this is going to surprise you, but the word covenant is typically a reformed word. And so if you are into covenant theology, other words for that is covenantalism, federal theology, or federalism, that typically means Reformed theology. And so the way that they view this, the reason it's called covenant theology is because they're going to view all the covenants in the exact opposite way that I would say you should view covenants. They're viewing covenants in terms of contracts. You guys know the difference between a spiritual agreement and a contract. We're not in a paper black and white contract in our religion with Jesus. We're in something much more than that. And so they're systematically trying to arrange things to sort of align in terms of topics. Now, why would my school have a name like Covenant Theological Seminary if covenant theology is exactly the opposite of what they're teaching and they believe? Doesn't seem to make much sense, does it? Now, I didn't come up with a name. The name has been there for 60 years. But it has something to do with this. It has something to do with the idea, and you know Steve and I talk about covenant more than anything else. In fact, we're both writing books, and that's the one that we get asked more of the time. When are you guys going to write a book on understanding what biblical covenant means, because the world has messed up that definition. The world doesn't know what real covenant is anymore. And I hate to say it, but that is one of the ditches of Reformed theology, is that they have messed up the definition of what covenant looks like before the Lord. And so when you have a seminary like mine, guess what one of our tenets of the seminary is? We are going to reclaim what biblical covenant means, despite the rest of the world not doing a very good job, even in Christianity, evangelical Christianity. So one of the problems is Reformed theology has sort of smeared what it means to live in real covenant with the Lord. And so in the same way that some of you might want to reclaim the rainbow, I still have a hard time wearing like a rainbow shirt. Even though I'm totally in to taking back this promise, this sign that God gave us, I'm still hesitant to walk out in my purple, pink rainbow. I don't really have a purple, pink rainbow shirt, but that's hard. But it's a little easier for me to reclaim the covenant. But I'm going to do them both. Even though it's hard, I'm going to do them both. So you might wonder why covenant theology, Reformed theology, Calvinism isn't Spirit-led. And this is a hard one. Essentially, what they're trying to do is put everything in a nice, tight pile. So they're going to organize it by typically topics and then try to connect everything else. And so that's called systematic theology. You may or may not have realized it, but systematic theology is actually a reformed way of looking at things. The other side of that is biblical theology. Biblical theology is going to do something a little bit different. It's going to look at the way that the Bible talks about different things like covenants and in each separate verse, and it's going to see how each reaction to those things work in different places in the Bible. And so it's not really topical like systematic theology is, trying to make stacks. They're looking at the whole lens of the Bible and trying to determine how all of these things work together. Now, you guys hear me talk that language all the time, that like this has to fit together within the whole lens of the Bible. So when I say things like that, what I'm really saying is that this is what biblical theology is, that it connects everything, that if you go back to Psalms and you read that God is like this in the Psalms, and then you get to 2 Corinthians and it seems like God might be somewhat different than that, then you have to figure it out. You can't just throw it out. Where a topical version of looking at that just isn't going to connect the two. They're going to say they're completely unconnected. And so I don't like that. Let's talk about again, you might be a covenant or you might be a Reformed theologian if here's some things out there, and I don't want to throw them all under the bus. I don't want to make it sound like they're all evil because, again, I'm just going to go back to the first thing I said, that a lot of them are doing God's word. I just don't think it's quite in line with fitting everything together. But here's some things. You've probably heard of the 5 solas of Reformed theology. Sola Scriptura, sola fide, sola gratia, sola Christus, sola Deo Gloria. It's Latin. I don't speak Latin, so I might have just massacred those things. I'm not sure. Part of the problem with what happened at the Reformation accomplished some good things. It broke away from a government-run form of church that is going to kind of lock in. And one of the things the government did was they made it so that it was very difficult to read the Bible in the original languages like Greek and Hebrew. Everything turned to be Latin, but the problem is even the people that were reading it in heads of churches and things like that, guess what? They didn't really read Latin either. And so it was sort of a way that only the government could read the Bible. And they didn't offer Latin classes and things like that. So that's where these come from. And all of them are basically alone. They're Scripture alone, faith alone, grace alone, Christ alone, to the glory of God alone is the last one. And you might notice some songs sing about this. Have you ever gone to Ryan and say, hey, Ryan, why don't we ever sing this song? Anybody ever done that before? And oftentimes, Ryan and Steve talk about these things quite a bit. And one of the things that comes up all the time is we're not going to sing that song because it points you towards Reformed theology. And it's a ditch that we don't believe in, that we don't want to go down. And by singing a song like this, it might actually open the door for people when they sing those words to start believing that that's actually the way that God works. And we don't want to open the door to that. So if you've ever wondered, man, I heard this great song on Caleb, Ryan, we should play this song. And he goes, nope, we're not playing that song. And he might be really strong about it. And that's one of the reasons why he might feel strongly about it, because he feels like it might go down the wrong ditch. And so, like I said, biblical theology is looking at unfolding God's revelation through history, through the way the Scriptures work together, through the authors telling one thing to another. And with that comes biblical theology, not systematic theology. Now, does that mean that you should never study systematic theology? I'm a book guy. I love books. And so, by the way, this is hot off the press, new book. It doesn't actually officially come out for about 2 more months. However, I brought a whole bunch of them for you guys. And so if you go into the library, hang a quick right. I filled up 1.5 bookshelves of these, and nobody else gets them for 2 months. So you guys are a little ahead on that one. Yeah, isn't that awesome? It looks just like the first one. It's just got a different picture, and it says community rather than discipleship. So if you go, I think I've already got it, you don't have this one yet. So this is the follow-up to the first one. And there's a third one that will come out next year. Books, going back to books. I don't think there's anything wrong with giving an unbiased look into other theology. In fact, if you go to our seminary, Covenant Theological Seminary, what you're going to find is you're going to take a class, and we have no problem, even though we're not Reformed at all, asking you to read books that are influenced by Reformed theology. In fact, one of the first things that you do is you kind of look at one of the key textbook systematic theology books, and then you read the key textbook for biblical theology. They're both about this big, and you figure out the difference between them, the way that they're viewing it differently. And another thing that you might find interesting about my house is that I have almost as many books on Reformed theology as I do on the other side. What do we call that? I don't know. On the free will side of the fence. And so if you come to my home and you look at my library, there's a whole section on Reformed theology. And I've read every book in the library before. And it's just affirmed my ideas not to go that way, that I don't think it holds water. Now, here's something that might surprise you. Some of the best names out there, some of the people you're most familiar with, I guarantee you've read their books, you've listened to their podcasts, you've heard their sermons, and you probably got something out of it. In fact, I would say every sermon that I've ever heard, I get a takeaway from. I can take something away from that. Really, even if they're horrible, even if they're the opposite of my theology, I can almost always walk away gleaning something from it. And I think that's the Holy Spirit. And so I'm not saying that you can't get anything good out of these authors, these different websites. In fact, I have no problem going and, looking for any of them. If I'm looking for something and I go, well, this is something that really isn't a Reformed, it's not going to be influenced by Reformed theology. I have no problem reading what they say about it. And I'll give you an example of that. I'm a preterist. This is a very minor view in theology. What a preterist means is that the great majority, and this is a place, by the way, where Steve and I do slightly disagree, so I'll kind of put that out here. And I'm not telling you guys you should go home and be preterists. I'm just giving you an example of this. Is a preterist believes that just about everything that you read in terms of prophecy in the New Testament, including Revelation, has already happened. That it's already taken place. That when John was writing the book of Revelation, he was writing it for the things that were going to take place in the immediate future. And that's why, one of the reasons why, almost all of the New Testament authors believed that the Lord was coming back in their lifetime. And so when I read the book of Revelation, I would actually say all the way up to about chapter 19 has already been done. Even I don't believe in a central Antichrist. I believe there were several Antichrist figures in past and probably coming in the future. And so that's a difference. The only reason I'm telling you that is because there are a whole bunch of Reformed theologians that land where I land on this one. And so I know that if I'm studying preterism, that this isn't something that's split necessarily. Reformed theologians don't feel this way, and then the free will people think this way. It's not affected by Reformed theology. And there's a lot of things that aren't affected by Reformed theology. And so even though, in general, R.C. Sproul just passed away about 2 years ago. You might have heard of him. He started a website called Ligonier, and it has sort of been the herald. And this article I just wrote, I actually shared one of his articles on what tulip is and said, basically, you can go read his description of tulip because I don't want to be unbiased. I want you to get their version of what they say it is. And so that's what he would say. And he was really an amazing speaker to the point that you could listen to him speak about anything and probably believe it and go, that's what I believe. Well, until you really get into it, then you might not believe that. But I grew up listening to him, and he's a preterist. And, even though the rest of theology I would just about completely disagree with R.C. Sproul on, that's one place where we land. So here's some names. Obviously, John Calvin. Here's one that might surprise you. Francis Chan is Reformed in his theology. Does that mean that Francis Chan doesn't have great stuff? I think he's one of the best communicators of our day. I think he's one of the best guys out there to talk about relationships, to talk about marriage, to talk about what the church really should look like. I know him personally and I love him. I just think he's one of our best guys out there, but he is Reformed in theology. Matt Chandler, John MacArthur, John Piper, David Platt, Rick Warren, Paul Washer, some YouTube guys, Paul Washer, James White, Augustine, and Martin Luther. Now that is not an exhaustive list. There's a whole bunch of other people that are there. But if you're listening to their stuff, there's some times where you might need to be careful. Everybody tracking so far? Here's some websites. The Gospel Coalition. We've all been on the Gospel Coalition's website. 9 Marks is really, really good. And this church tends to take a egalitarian perspective rather than a complementarian perspective, meaning that today there is no necessary difference between a woman and a man coming up and preaching the Word of God. We believe that it's possible for God to speak through women in the same way that He speaks through men. Amen? 9 Marks believes that, but they also believe a whole bunch of Reformed theology. So I know when I'm looking for good egalitarian theology, I trust what 9 Marks has to say about that, but I don't trust what they have to say about a whole bunch of other things. Lifeway is one. Desiring God, you've probably been on that one before. Got Questions. Anybody know that's a Reformed website? And not even just Reformed, I would even say Calvinistic. Christianity.com is also a Reformed website. Theopedia, John MacArthur's Grace to You, Focus on the Family has a very Reformed bend to it. Josh Harris, Bible.org, Crossway. Matt Slick, you probably don't know this one, but Carm.org, you might have done that. Compelling Truth, one of my best friends runs that one. Really good guy. Moody Media, I'm a Moody graduate. When I went to Moody, it wasn't as reformed as it is today, but today it's gotten quite reformed in theology. And so all of those things are sort of some guideposts or some identification of something to be careful listening to them. Now, what are you being careful about? That's what I'm going to get to. Before we go there, Bob, stand up with that microphone. I might get to your questions, so if anybody has a question, you're welcome, and I might just put you off for a second because I'm going to get there. But does anybody have any questions on any of this so far? Little open conversation, anything like that? And again, like I said, get Bob's attention if you ever have something, or just raise your hand and I'll connect you with Bob. I don't ever mind today just stopping in the middle of the talk.
This is such a great opportunity that I really want to encourage you to take that. We do not have these kind of opportunities other than on Wednesday nights. And these little hiccups, thank you, sis, these little hiccups, these little places that Doc Ryan's teaching us about are just those areas that'll cause you to spin in circles right there. Okay.
I have a real simple question. What is Reformed theology?
Great question. So the question is, what does exactly mean to be reformed? So what I believe on the free will side is going to be anytime you read the Old Testament, they didn't have necessarily an understanding of the way that salvation really worked. If you read the Old Testament, you don't get that. You don't really ever. I mean, it was just this big blanket thing of like, are people going to be saved? Maybe, maybe not. And so what Reformed theology really is a way of understanding salvation. And I'm going to get into that next. That's where we're going. So that was a great lead-in question. They organize it in a way to easily understand it called tulip. So that's what we're talking about, and I'll kind of identify it. But for most of time, people didn't read it that way. So for the whole early church, in fact, this didn't happen really until Augustine put it together. I'll get to some of this. So that's about 500 AD that people start to kind of think this way. But it really doesn't get conceptualized to become systematic theology until the Reformation. And that, again, that was because the church wasn't allowing people to necessarily think for themselves. They were telling them what to think. And the Reformers said, we don't like this. We want to be able to think for ourselves. But because they didn't have really the Bible that we have up until that point, and they certainly didn't have the interlinears in the Greek and Hebrew that we have, they got a little off. So what the Reformers did was basically good to take that away from the government, but their theology was off because they just didn't have a very good perspective. And so this always surprises me when I say it this way, but essentially you have a whole bunch of reformers that really hadn't had access to the Bible the way you and I had it, and they came up with their own theology, even not having the Bible available to them like we have. That sounds pretty crazy, doesn't it? That like you would kind of hear it in Latin even though you didn't really know it. Like some of you, Spanish is probably the most prevalent one. Like everybody in the room knows at least a little bit of Spanish, like Donde el baño or something like that. But if I was going to try to give you theology in Spanish, would you be able to write a book on it? No, it would be very difficult. And so that's sort of what happened out of the Reformation. It was some really good things happened, but it was also probably the time in history that spiritually we got the most off course. Another question?
Where do gifts of the Spirit fit on the scale?
That's a great question. So if I'm going back to my scale, and you have 5-point Calvinism over here, this is the middle, my nose, and you have most of evangelical churches a little bit on the Calvinistic side, so they start about right here and go to right here. Gifts of the Spirit are going to be just off of dead center on this side. And so if you go to a normal evangelical church, I don't know, Bob, what's a good example of your mainline Bible church in this area? Is there one?
Well, there's an EV Free Church in town here.
That'll work. So
Yep.
EV Free is going to be pretty much dead middle of this. Some of them are going to be dispensational, which I'll get there, which if you're dispensational, that tends to be Reformed, and they're going to say they think that the gifts of the Spirit have ceased for a certain amount of time. And so they would believe in the end times, the gifts of the Spirit are going to return. Are we in the end times yet? Well, they're not. None of my evangelical free churches are speaking in tongues yet, so we must not be in the end times. So that's where they land, though. They're somewhere a little on this side, somewhere a little on that side. So you basically, I do have friends that go to evangelical free churches that are repressed charismatics, meaning that they do believe in the gifts of the Spirit, but it's not encouraged like in a prayer Bible study, in most of them anyway. There's another question. Mary's got a question over here too. Yep. This is good, yep.
I was just wondering, what exactly is a Calvinist?
What's a Calvinist? I'm going to get to that one too, so hold on to that for a little bit. So a Calvinist is somebody that's going to affirm 5 pillars of how salvation works with the acronym called TULIP. And that's what we're going into. Any other questions before I jump into that? All right, so this is the bread and butter of this thing. And you would think that it's going to take me hours to tell you what a Calvinist is. And it's more like 10 minutes to tell you what a Calvinist is. And so you can take notes here. I also, like I said, I have a article that I just wrote that's way more in depth, and it gets into one of the, if you watch Expedition 44 videos, kind of our mantra is we don't leave a rock overturned, meaning that if there's any discussion about this stuff, we're usually going to get into that. Unfortunately, this article doesn't get into that because it would make it, it's about a 15-page article, but instead of being a 15-page article, it'd probably be a 1,500-page article. And so I can't quite leave every rock unturned, but it gets way more into it than what I'm going to get today. So Calvinism today has sort of become a bad word in evangelical Christianity. Even in an evangelical free church, if somebody says, well, I'm a 5-point Calvinist, everybody in the evangelical church goes, well, you should go to a Calvinist church then, or a Reformed church, even though the majority of the people at that evangelical free church are going to adhere to about 2 or 3 of the 5 points of Calvinism. And so I would actually say that most evangelical free churches and a lot of non-denominational middle-of-the-road churches are Calvinist by nature. And so that can create some issues. And so the first thing, this is kind of the acronym that kind of goes with it. And the first one, it spells TULIP, T-U-L-I-P. And so these are the 5 pillars of Calvinism. They all are connected to salvation. So everything is basically based on the work of salvation in somebody's life. And so the first one is T. It stands for total depravity. Now, I'm just going to say that when I go through these, some of them are going to sound a little like crazy because you guys aren't used to being in these circles. if you were raised in a mainline church that believed this way, or even more like a Reformed church, you're going to notice that a lot of this is just built into the way that you talk. So how many of you guys in here have ever shared the Romans road of salvation? I mean, I would think you don't have to raise your hands because I'm going to say bad things about it in just a second. But most people in the room have used the Romans road to try to bring somebody to a knowledge or salvation. I don't have any problem walking the Romans road, but the way that I'm going to walk the Romans road is usually a little bit different than what's printed for walking. My terminology changes a little bit. Most step plans for salvation are based on Calvinistic thinking. And so if you've ever used those things, believe it or not, but you might be using a little bit of Calvinism. So let's get back to the T. The T is total depravity, and I'm going to insert the word more specifically, hereditary depravity. So what does that mean? This is point number one of you might be a Calvinist. This is the belief that the human soul is born corrupt, bad, that the human soul is evil. And again, I'm going to go back to saying traditional Jews don't think any of this stuff. So if you talk to any of a traditional Jew, it's not, none of this is in the Old Testament. You wouldn't find it anywhere in there. And so in the Old Testament, they're going to believe throughout all the pages that for the most part, God designed things good. The word tov, you might be. You know, God creates this and it's good. And then Calvinism basically says that once sin enters the world, that things are no longer created good. Now from creation or even inception, now that they become created bad. That's hard when the Bible starts out by saying they're all created good, right? How can you change that? And so this gets into things like as soon as a baby is born, it basically means it's in the sinful nature, and it would be in need of a redeemer. Now, there are hard questions with this. These are gray areas in the Bible, so there are still some things that you're going to wrestle with here. You should wrestle with some of these points. So, in traditional Judaism, it's called there's two inclinations. There's a Yetzer Hara, and there's a Yetzer Tov, an inclination or a desire to do evil, and there's an inclination to do good, tov. And they're always sort of at fighting with each other. Now, I believe that. I feel that in my life. Anybody feel that? I mean, you can go back to the little, remember Tom and Jerry, the little evil mouse here and the good one here, and they're always trying to get them to decide. That's, for most of time, that's the way it's been thought. That there's an inclination to go both ways, and you in your own will, your own free will, are going to have to make that choice. Are you going to make the choice to align with the Lord, or are you going to make a choice to align with the world and the powers and the principalities that are against us? And that's your choice. And that's the way that we believe, and I would say James 1:17 and Matthew 7 and Old Testament, Ecclesiastes 12 and Zechariah 12. I could keep going. There's a whole bunch of them, verses that are really hard to read that seem to tell us that it's our choice to do this or to do that. Which one are you going to do? Rather than to believe that after Adam's sin, that we're all naturally just evil. But that's the T. That's total depravity. The other problem with the T is, this is why I say this is an ontological, philosophical, theological conversation, is because if that's true, do you believe, where are our babies in bellies? Where did they go? All right, Brittany, there you are. If you believe that that baby, the living baby inside of Brittany right now, is an evil baby, then you might be a Calvinist. If you believe that that baby is beautifully designed, made by the Lord, beautiful in every way, shape, or form, regardless of what it looks like or comes out like or anything like that, you believe that God designed that baby good, not evil, then you're not a Calvinist in this regard. That sounds so easy to make that decision. Like right now, if I say, who believes Brittany's baby is evil, stand up. Nobody would stand up, right? I mean, that sounds nuts. But it even gets worse than that, because if I believe that then God, who made your baby? I mean, you guys sort of did. We don't want to talk about that. But God really made your baby, right? God built your baby. If you believe that God created your baby, then do you believe, if you're a Calvinist, that God is creating evil? That's the problem. If you believe in total depravity, you believe that God is creating evil. And that's what's called the classic problem of evil. And I can tell you, so many people have walked away from the faith because of this problem. And I would have to say, if this was my only option, was to hold a Calvinist version of God creating evil babies, I would have walked away from that faith too. I would have had a major problem with that. But what breaks my heart is when people are walking away from the faith when this isn't what the Bible is teaching, and that's what they think is going on. Unconditional election. That's the U. This doctrine says that since man is born in a sinful state, it kind of tailors off the first one, there's nothing that an individual can do in order to be saved. Now this one, when you read the Romans Road the way that you normally know it, not of yourselves, it is the free gift, lest any man should brag. There are some scriptures that would seem to point to this, that is a total work that God has done. The problem is if you take that too far, what it turns out to mean is that God from the very beginning is going to choose who becomes saved and who isn't going to become saved. That's what unconditional election means. And so it essentially is going to say that from the very beginning, God sort of chooses that this person will be there and this person won't. Those are called the elect in Reformed theology. And so, do you believe, I call this the cosmic lottery of Calvinism, do you believe that God chose you because of that, and then He held you with the tractor beam, sort of, into your faith or Christianity? And sort of, it would be actually kind of deceptive if this is true, to make you believe that you were making choices for yourself when it was all just robotically done for you from the very beginning. That's a hard one for me to bite off, especially when Peter preached on Pentecost that those there must present themselves. He actually uses the word save themselves in Acts 2. How can they save themselves? Well, that's an act that only God can do. So you have to say that the grace that God gives, only God can do the act of salvation, yet there is a response that He's looking for humanity. We have to do that. This is called an exodus motive in the Bible. What's the first thing that happened in the Exodus? When Moses says, Israelites, I want to save you. If you want to receive this or be part of the team, this is what you have to do. Take the blood, put the blood over the doorpost. You have to make a choice that you want to be part of the Israelite culture from this day forward. And He still works that way. That's what Matthew 7 is about. 2 Corinthians 5:10, John 12:48, Ecclesiastes 12 again. I said that one a few minutes ago. But this unconditional election puts us into being godly robots, that almost no choice we can make is really ours if it was all determined from the beginning of time. I'll get more into this one a little bit. The next one is limited atonement. Now, this one is very similar to the last one. So unconditional election eventually is going to lead to limited atonement. And what that means, this is the L in TULIP, is the belief that Christ only died for a few, not for everybody. Now, Romans 5, again, the Romans road, this is where you kind of get into Calvinism and you go, well, how can you read Romans 5 that says, that God dies for everybody? This is a hard one. Now, this gets down to when this was interpreted, they only had Latin. And I'm going to come back to this one, but I'm just going to leave you on the fence right now saying limited atonement is basically the idea that there's only going to be very, very few that God is going to do the work for. Now, it sounds like the last thing. The difference is that it's really looking at the idea that God's saving work wasn't for everybody. It was only for some of them. So unconditional election and limited atonement are sort of tied at the hip together. In fact, the big joke in theology is that they had to spell the word tulip or they would have been together. The next one, irresistible grace. That's the I. This is the belief that the elect, those that are chosen by God, are going to be saved whether they desire to be saved or not. And so that God is going to basically, from the beginning of time, they don't really have the ability to choose no, they don't want to be saved. And so to think this, you basically have to say that God is going to, again, hold them. Now, the words keep and hold are biblical. I do believe that there's truth to this. And again, this is where I get back to some of this you do really have to sink your teeth into. I mean, there's some truth to every one of these things in the Bible. And so when you say keep and hold, does that mean that from the beginning of time, this would be the Calvinist way of thinking, that God is going to elect that person and then he's going to make it impossible for them to make a decision of their own volition to leave Christianity? He's going to keep and hold them there. Now, you might think about some things that you say, well, I might believe that. Out of all the different ones, irresistible grace is, I think, the one that I personally am the most open to on all of them. I could see, I don't know about every single person that God's going to keep and hold that way, but I can definitely see in my life where, because I've prayed for people, I think that God has kept them surrounded by Christians in a walk and didn't release them or let them go. And so there's some irresistible grace. This is where I said every part of us has some essence of Calvinism thinking inside of us. Now, I don't prescribe to all of it as irresistible grace, but I could go along with a little bit of it. The next one, perseverance of the saints. And this is probably what most of you guys have struggled with in terms of a biblical question more than anything else as it relates to salvation and Calvinism, is do you believe in once saved, always saved? That's what perseverance of the saints means, is do you believe that once somebody is saved, they're always saved? Now, I want to come back to this one, but the problem that I want to set on the shelf with you, and it's ontological again, is that how many of you guys know somebody, and we're not supposed to judge somebody's salvation, so don't judge somebody's salvation, but we have indicators. And the reason we have indicators is because as brothers and sisters in Christ, when we see somebody struggling, when we see those indicators, fruit on the good side or struggling, tribulation, turmoil on the other side, it's supposed to be an indicator that we're supposed to, as the body, the hands and feet of Christ, come alongside and help shepherd that person through whatever they're going through. Your church is doing a lot of that right now, and they should be. And so there's these indicators, and just about everybody here knows somebody that had every indicator of being saved in their life, yet later they had every indicator of not being saved. What do you do with that if you believe in once saved, always saved? What do you do with that? All right, Bob, come back up for Q&A. That is tulip. That's what a Calvinist is. You might be a Calvinist if you believe any one of those points, 2, 3 of those points. If you believe them all, then you're a 5-point Calvinist. You should wrestle with this. In fact, this should be the day that starts your 3, 4, 5-year plan. One of the most outspoken free will people out there right now. His name is Leighton Flowers. He teaches for our sister seminary called Trinity in Indiana. And he was a wheels-off 5-point Calvinist when I met him. I mean, you couldn't be any more Calvinist. And he basically said, out of all the things in theology, I'm not sure about these 5 things. So I'm going to take the next 3 years of my life and I'm going to dive in. And at the end of the 3 years, he didn't ascribe to any of them. He said, I don't believe in any of them anymore. And so it should take you time. If this is the first time you're hearing any of these things, take it nice and slow. If you have a friend that doesn't understand these kind of things, don't share my article and think you're going to change their mind the first time they read it. Like, these are long, hard things to work your way through. These are the gray issues of the Bible in large part. These 5 are, so the reason they picked these 5 things is because these are the 5 ones that they wrestled with. These were what was dividing people. And so they basically said, everybody who thinks this way can join the Calvinist club over there, and if you don't, join that. And for when it started, I mean, hardly anybody joined the Calvinist club. They joined the Calvinist club if they just wanted to get out of government church, but they didn't really prescribe to the theology. And even today, when you really look at, there's a lot of churches out there that might be Reformed Baptist churches that are maybe 2 or 3 point Calvinist churches or something, but there's very few Calvinist congregations out there. And so that's still kind of the way it is. Go ahead.
So in my own journey, though, I found these places, which is why I encouraged you earlier. Open your heart. Allow these questions to be risen up in you. That's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Leading you on a rabbit trail. The BLT would be rabbit trail.
Yep.
I don't want to follow religion. I'm a follower of Jesus. Anybody else? I want to be discipled by Jesus and my family and my brothers.
Yep.
And I want to search the scriptures for these truths that will make us free. Okay, questions?
Your free will, I don't need that.
Yeah, use the microphone. By the way, hold on. Stand up, Paul, next to Sam. This is Sam and Paul. You guys might not know them. They're 2 of my best friends in life. They went on our marriage retreat last year, and so they're really good friends with their family. Paul is newly married. Sam's got a whole bunch of kids. So, beloved family, say hello. Welcome.
The free will title that you're kind of giving yourself and other people, is that because that's your main argument against those points? Because I see, as you're explaining these, free will kind of goes against a lot of the arguments, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have free will, you can't line up with a lot of these points.
So there's 2, Sam, that's a great question. There's 2 ways there's 3 things that I would say of myself. I'd either say I'm not reformed, that's an easy way to say it, or I would say I'm completely free will, because as Sam pointed this out, almost everything in this in Calvinism is about God chose you from the beginning. It's robotic. It's not really your choice. It's the sovereignty, omniscience of God that has basically made all these decisions for you. So that's the opposite of free will thinking. So you can't really believe in much of free will thinking and be reformed. I mean, it's a rival thought with each other. Either you believe that we're our own entities and every decision I make I'm responsible for, and I'm going to suffer the consequences of the bad one and reap the fruits of the good kingdom ones, or that it's all been set out for me before.
And so enter the chosen one that I personally speak about a lot, and we do in our body, right? I was chosen to be right here, right now, at this very moment, with a brother that I can't believe is my brother.
Right.
Right? And I'm not a marionette. God's will gave me free will to make every step in accordance with Jesus being the lamp to my feet.
So there
ditches.
are words that he just used, like being chosen, being set apart is one of my favorite ones. Somebody's probably got that t-shirt on right now. It's a difference in interpretation of biblical words. So I believe that we were, from the beginning of time, that this plan came. And in some cases, I believe that God wanted me to stand here for this purpose today. I believe in the God's sovereignty that he can do things like that. I'm not limiting God at any point. Sometimes I say, I think God specifically did that. Sometimes I say it was his order. You know that word order in the Old Testament? Let me give you a better rendition of that. The reason it says order is because the word order is how old? 6,000, 8,000 years old from the beginning of the Bible. They didn't have the science to understand it. A better word to you that's going to flush more into your thought pattern of the way this works is algorithm. Think algorithm. And so what God is going to do is he's going to design the way that things work. Some people even kind of look at it like a point system. So let's just kind of say this, Brandon, our drummer over here. If Brandon is praying for one thing in his life over here, and he's in devotion, God says things happen certain ways. He says that when we're devout, he answers our prayers, right? When we live in devotion. Did you ever notice in your life that the more you live in devotion, the more that it seems like God aligns with you? So that's true, right? In the Old Testament, they had this conundrum through the book of Job and Genesis and really all the pages of the Old Testament is, does God work through a retribution principle? Does God bless? Anybody hear our message that Bob gave earlier? Does God bless those that are in devotion with him? Well, the answer to that is he does, but maybe not the way that you think he's going to. Is he going to do what he did for Abraham and give you tons of sheep and everything else? Well, I don't even know what you guys would do if 10,000 sheep showed up at your doorstep right now. That's not really what I was thinking, God. I was thinking a Ferrari, but you know. It's part of the algorithm, though. So God does work that way, but he's not bound to it. And so when Brandon's praying for this, when I'm praying for this, when this is happening in my life, how many of you guys think you're in the end times tribulation right now? Not very many of you, but some of you might. If you lived in China right now, you would believe you're living in tribulation right now. So you have to kind of view this as the answer is yes in front of God. It's just simply yes. God works all these things together according to his will. That verse is often misrepresented. It's not everything works for you or for me individualistically. It's a kingdom verse. It works together for the kingdom. So sometimes it's hard to understand this, but perhaps our tribulation or turmoil is that somebody else next to us can be going through something greater. And that's for God and God alone. I'll use the alone word. I'm not afraid to use the alone word and not be of Reformed theology. Go ahead.
Growing up in the Baptist church, I had a pastor that was very influential, and I still remember him telling me that he fell between a 1.5 to 2.5 point Calvinist.
Yep.
And that 5-point Calvinism was a bad thing. But what I noticed is when he got to the book of Revelation, suddenly it seemed like he was very 5-point Calvinist.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if is that a thing that makes sense? And
so you picked up on something that I alluded to earlier, is that dispensationalism tends to be a Calvinist trait. And so, again, I won't get too much into dispensationalism. If you go to expedition44.com, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a bunch of article posts, and there's a search box. If you type dispensational in there, there's a great article on it. And so you'll get some of that. But dispensationalism is essentially the idea that there are different dispensations or periods of time where things happen. Tongues is the easiest way, like I already explained it, to tell you that. But it's a lot bigger than that. This is another ditch, I would call, that you don't really want to get into. And the end times always thinking that it's the end times. And so John, who wrote the book of Revelations, and every disciple thought they lived in the end times. They were the end timers of their day. And what is his name? Rabbi Khan, you might be familiar with him. I love a lot of his stuff. I love most of his stuff. But you might not know that he predicted that the Lord was coming back in 2017. And he had a really, really good way of going through the Old Testament and coming out with the notes. In fact, I read it and I just sat back and I went, huh. But did Christ come back in 2017? No. And no one knows the time or the hour, and I just keep telling myself that, you know. What it turns into is a lot of doom and gloom thinking. And so dispensationalism and Calvinism hold in common what I would call doom and gloom thinking, that it's the end of the world. This comes from we aren't good enough. It's total depravity thinking that we cannot in of ourselves be good people. Now, it is true that we need that connection with God to get there, but we're not even capable of making a choice to step towards the Lord. Where I believe in here, when you come to church, what you're coming here for in large part is so that when the powers and the principalities come up against you, that you will have brothers and sisters that stand with you, that you can have the knowledge of the Scripture inside of you, that when you face every one of those decisions, you're going to step towards the Lord, not the other way. And that's the problem with Calvinism, is it says I really can't do that. It's not my decision. It's been made for me. You're stuck here and you're never going to get out of it. And if you live that way, guess what? You're living in spiritual depression. And God doesn't want that for you. I mean, the pages are full of the Bible telling you to be delivered from that kind of thinking. Now, this touches on something very simply that, like, you're always invited and encouraged at this church to come and to receive prayer. If you're going through turmoil, tribulation, things like that, then there's a great cloud of witnesses, I might even say. They're going to walk with you as you do that. And there are seasons. This is biblical. The best people, the most righteous person, Job, went through a whole lot of these. And he did have brothers that walked with them. At the end of Job, it tells you, yeah, they were kind of off too. But he did. So I want you to encourage you guys to keep coming, but there's also another side of this. It's different when you keep making decisions for yourself to walk that way. And I don't mean to put you guys on the evil side of the church or anything, but you know what I'm saying. You don't want to keep knowingly in your free will intentionally make decisions that way, because that's constantly going to pull you farther away from God. And God wants you to live in freedom, in success, in Bob's message that he preaches every single week in this church, that you can live a redeemed life that leads to joy. That's what the pages of the Bible say, and that's quite frankly very opposite of Calvinism. Question?
Yeah, so when it comes then, I guess, to the Great Commission, when it comes to discipleship, how are viewpoints on this, how does this affect how we handle discipleship relationships and even our motives behind it?
Yeah. So I'm glad Paul's here. Whenever I write these posts, they're think tank posts. So I have a whole bunch of people that help me write this. So this last one, there are about 5 people that helped write it. And Paul's a CTS student, which means he has a little bit of an edge because he's in year 2 in CTS, which means he understands hermeneutics and theology a little bit more than your average guy probably does. But about 4 months ago, he decided he was going to tackle this thing on total depravity and original sin. So he's been walking on this. So he actually, if you go read the article, he helped write the article on part of this. And so what he's alluding to is really important, and I'm going to get to that. So hold on to that one, and it's 11:42. My goal is noon. I have a terrible reputation of preaching longer than I should at this church. So, so let's keep moving. How about that? along with the first point of total depravity, you're going to get something called original sin. So this is going to answer Paul's question, and then I'm also going to continue with evangelism to do that. Total depravity is not the same thing as original sin, although they are very much connected. And so you're going to hear people say, well, I don't believe in total depravity, but I do believe in original sin. And so, well, what is original sin? We've actually are in the middle, we're on the tail end. We got one episode left on Expedition 44 talking about original sin. Many of you guys have listened to parts of those. So I'm not going to get real into this because you can go and listen to a lot more. I really don't have time to really hit on this anyway, but original sin is very similar, but it essentially, I alluded to this one earlier too, it pins everything on Adam. It says because Adam sinned, now we're all reaping the consequences of that. Now, like I said, there is some truth to this. I do believe that there was an original sin that had terrible repercussions to the rest of the world. It's going to open the door, the floodgate, you might even call it, of sin in the world. I believe right now that our world is in a horribly mucked up place. Every part of it is. Why? Well, Adam opened the door to sin. That's original sin. But the problem is when you start believing in evil babies, like I said, when you start believing that there is no way out of this, that God's plan for us isn't big enough to overcome this. And this is actually a 5-point Calvinist theme of like, a lot of Calvinists believe that we really should have been raptured in 70 AD, but the church wasn't there yet. And now we're sort of just treading water and we're still not there yet. That God's like waiting for us to be redeemed before we're taken away. And I'm not going to touch that one too much, but it's part of what comes with Reformed thinking. And so original sin, you can watch the series. Where this goes south is in 440 AD. Augustine is going to try to interpret a verse, and the Latin versions insert Adam into this, and I'm just going to say it's Romans 5:12. It's a bad translation. This sounds so simple. We all know who Augustine was, a great pillar of church faith. You probably don't know that he wasn't a great guy, that he had all kinds of issues. And so I don't want to totally throw him under the bus. Augustine in the church world is going to be way more famous than Bob or Steve Castle or anything like that. He did some good things, but he really set us on a lot of bad stuff. And one of them was this idea. And when I talk about evil babies, the term that sort of gets into this is concupiscence. You don't need to know how to say that, but it's the idea that Adam's sin was transferred through making baby activity for all the years that we are. And this is why we have monks, because monks believed that if they didn't do that, they might be able to stop the transferring of sin. And so it would essentially mean if everybody took that mindset, it would mean the whole world would just die, just like that. I mean, it doesn't really make sense, but that's what they were thinking. This is also why they had to did you ever wonder in Roman Catholicism why they had to make Mary also to be sinless? Did you guys know that that's kind of a Roman Catholic thing? Is because if she was like everybody else with sin, then Jesus, and she was Jesus' mother, then sin would have been, according to Augustine, transferred into Jesus, and Jesus wouldn't have been sinless. So this is like, with Reformed thinking, one thing goes on another. I call this theological gymnastics. Like one ditch leads to another, to another, to another. And theologically, I think it's a hot mess. And so that's where I kind of come back. And so John MacArthur, this will surprise you, this is a quote: "At no point is a man's depravity more manifest than in the procreative act. By what he creates, whatever comes from the loins of man is wicked." This is August. "The only innocent feature in babies is the weakness of their frames. The minds of infants are far from innocent." Again, evil babies. Sorry, Brittany, that's what they believe. This is also why infant baptism started. Did you ever wonder about that? So in the Roman Catholic Church, why are babies baptized? Because they believe they're evil. This sounds so crazy, doesn't it? Like I'm sitting here telling you guys this and you're like, what kind of cult is that? Yet it is what a significant amount of evangelical Christianity believes. And even if they don't think they believe it, it all goes that way. So if you think you're a 2 or 3 point Calvinist, but you're not getting into all of it, I go back to where I started. A good view on this is either to be totally on the free will side or to be over there. If you're stuck in the middle kind of thinking about this or that, you might get pulled into some really bad kind of thinking and theology. Now, I already told you there's a couple things I agree with, like the irresistible grace. I don't believe in it as Calvinism talks about it, but I could see some of it. And there are aspects in here that I think you should be open to. But when you become a Calvinist, there's going to be things that just don't make sense. So I already kind of talked about Calvinism and Arminianism, which you can read the article I wrote to get more into that. Critical race theory is another one of these things that doesn't really make sense. So if you talk to any Calvinist, they wouldn't be a fan of critical race theory, because it means that basically what we did, what we did to those that were of different racial ethnicities, things like that, was evil, and that we're paying for that over and over, and we still need to make payments for that. It actually sounds exactly like Calvinism. So there's a disconnect when you have a Calvinist that says, well, I believe that biblically to be true, but I don't believe in critical race theory. Now, it's easier for me just to say I don't believe in either one of them. But if you're Calvinist, if you want to have a consistent theology and you're a Calvinist, you actually are going to have to kind of go critical race theory because it lines up with your theology. Pro-life. Calvinists really shouldn't be pro-life, yet they all are. Figure that one out. Everybody that's a Calvinist believes in evil babies, yet somehow you're pro-life. And they would explain it by saying, well, we believe that God has elected or chosen some of them, so some of them will be now washed and made to not be evil, but the great majority of them are probably evil. They really shouldn't be pro-life, in my opinion. That's not pro-life, in my opinion. The other problem I have is I am what? I am a Christian. I'm a Christ follower. Because I go to Beloved Church, am I a Steve Castellinian or something like that? No. Thank God, right? No, I'm a Christian. I follow Christ. What are you if you're a Calvinist? Were you baptized in Calvin? Was Calvin crucified for you? I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but actually a lot of that lines up with their thinking. So be careful there. Predestination gets into prayer, and this is one, I want to spend a second on this. Predestination is a biblical word. And so the way that Calvinists use predestination, I don't like. And so am I going to not use the word predestination because the way that it's been used by Calvinists is horrible? Or am I going to choose, kind of like I said, the rainbow covenant, things like that, to just bring a more biblical definition to it? So the interpretation is different. And so the word predestination is proorzizo, and it's used... It basically means to mark something out beforehand. So that kind of gets into this idea of everything was predestined in a Calvinist idea, that it was set from the beginning of time, that God orchestrated things to be exactly this way. And like I said, this is complicated because sometimes I believe that God may have put me in this time, place right now, and He might have kept me in my faith to make sure I'd get here because He knew somebody needed to hear what was being talked about today. But do I believe that He does that for every single thing? In fact, I believe that usually not. I usually believe it's just a bunch of His order, that like if I decide to, go to Koinonia after this and have a burrito or go back to my house and have a hamburger, I don't know that God cares a whole lot or has orchestrated too much between those decisions. He leaves it up to me to walk in faith with him. It's a heart issue. And so there's 6 times this word predestination is used, and I won't get into it much, but I will say that in the New Testament, all 6 times, it just throws the word out there. We want it to teach what the word means. We often want the Bible to do a lot more than it does. We want it to be a history book, a science book, and everything else, and it sort of gets into all that stuff, but that's not the goal. The goal was to tell the story of God's love towards you and I and his church and the plan that he had for us. And so when we get into this, he doesn't tell us what the meaning of predestination is. However, in theology, when the words don't tell you, you search other places. And so in the Old Testament, there's a whole bunch of words that connect to that. And when you go and look at them, you're going to get the idea that this idea of being completely set before, there's nowhere to be found in the Old Testament. And typically I'd say the Old Testament and the New Testament totally agree. They're not going to have 2 different messages. What it says in the Old Testament is true of the New Testament. And so when you get into the Old, and I get real nerdy on this one, so I'm just going to tell you, like, if you really want to get into the Hebrew of this, you can track on the article that I wrote. It's my younger kids, junior high age kids can track with the definition. So you're welcome to go on and look through that, but I'm going to say none of the Old Testament would think of predestination this way. So what does it look like? It's simply God had a plan of order from the beginning of time. So from the beginning of time, God had a plan, and some things he might have felt more strongly about, like marriage or 2 people coming together, and you might have walked into that plan he had for you, or you might have walked away from it. And God's grace would say that if you walked away from his primary plan, there might be a plan B or C or D. Some of you are on plan like triple, quadruple, whatever it is by now. The alphabet times 26 maybe. But God's grace is that big. And as a Calvinist, you don't believe that. As a Calvinist, you wouldn't say that God's grace is that big, that dynamic. Another thing that this comes into is part of prayer. And I'm really going to just talk about one part of prayer. You might be familiar with the ACTS, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. What most of us pray like is God is a genie in the bottle. That's supplication. That's the extent of a lot of people's prayer life. Now, I get the beloved is my 1% church, so we're doing the whole ACTS. But if you're only praying for God in a bottle, God, give me this, give me that, the cosmic genie God of supplication, you're going to have a problem if you're going to have a problem with supplication anytime if you're a Calvinist, because what you basically don't believe is that God is sovereign enough to slightly change things. Now, I want to be careful. God's character never changes. God's character is immutable. It's not going to change from the Old Testament to the New Testament or, anything like that. But what I want to say is that, and this is so easy, do you believe that God answers prayer? Right? I mean, everybody in the room believes that God answers prayer. A Calvinist at the end of the day would question that. Does God really answer prayer? If he completely set everything from the very beginning of time, is he actually going to answer prayer, or is he just going to go with his original plan? He can't. And so if you believe that when Moses was up on Sinai and God says, I'm just going to wipe out these people, we're going to start with a nation that's really better set apart, and Moses pleads and God listens to Moses, you actually kind of believe that God actually changed his mind. That God was going to wipe out the people and then he changed. Why did he change his mind? This blows me away. Because his faithful servant asked him to. God listens to mere little you and me and changes the course of what his will may have intended because you asked him to. How amazing is that? I mean, that just blows me away. Now, is it worked into this algorithm of order or something else? Yeah, it probably is. But he does answer prayers. I can't tell you how many times I know that prayer was answered right away. And is it because of the faith of the person? Are you healed by the faith of the healer? Sometimes the Bible says that. Did you guys know that? That sometimes the faith of the healer is the one. So if you come for healing, Steve Castle, he would argue with me on this, by the way, but I'm just going to share. He's got a gift of healing. Anybody figure that one out yet? He's a healer. And he would say, well, everybody has a gift. This is where our theology doesn't agree. I say, no, you're a healer, brother. You got the gift. And I think we all have a little bit of that gift, and we can pray for that gift. But it is true that sometimes when we're praying for healing, it's the faith of the person praying for the healing. But it's also true that it's the faith of the person that's asking for the healing. Is one true and the other's not? No, they're both correct. That's the interweaving of this crazy thing called order, is that it is your devotion parts into it. If you come up and say, hey, my knee's been a mess for the last month, and I say to you like, when was the last time you had devotions? I don't know, 3 months ago. Well, brother, your knee's probably not going to get healed today then. But then God heals it. It says, I'll tell you what I'm going to do as an amazing work of grace. I'm just going to heal your knee even though you weren't devout to me. And I'm going to use it to show my glory. Don't put God in a box. We just don't know. We can't figure out whatever that algorithm is or the way that it works, but I think some things are just going to be programmed that we're in devout faithfulness. They just happen. And then other things are just going to be, you know what a miracle is? When God changes his own will. And it happens all the time. Wow. There's a couple more things I just want to touch on. They're pretty quick. The last one is, can Christians fall from grace? I already gave you the perspective of saying it looks like they can. I mean, logically, if you just sit around the room, everybody knows somebody that looked like a Christian and then they weren't anymore. My sister is a living testament to that one. This girl was the most on-fire Christian, before she was 16, she went to 10 different countries as being a missionary, and now she changed her last name to Sin and lives in a Gothic commune and looks nothing like the Lord. Do I believe in once saved, always saved? Well, that sure doesn't look like it. But there are a few ways that this could happen. And so I just want to open the door, and I want to say that these are minor views in theology. I don't even necessarily hold to them, but it is possible to believe in once saved, always saved. So if you're going to believe this, you have to believe that people like my sister are going to come back to their faith at some point. Because there's no question in my mind that if you would have taken a snapshot of her at 19 years old, she looked more like a Christian than, I don't know, maybe half or 2/3 of the people in this room did. She bore that fruit. So now, for me to say once saved, always saved, it means that either on her deathbed, I believe that God's going to keep her and hold her, and she's going to have a conversation with the Lord. I believe that's possible. I believe that's very possible in a lot of people's lives. Sometimes you hear about that happening with people, and I think that's a very viable understanding. I also think, this one you probably have never heard of, you're familiar with the creeds. Almost all the creeds have this phrase that might not sit well with you, that Christ descended into the depths. It might be called Hades or something like that. And so there's this, it's a more orthodox understanding that when Christ died, he went to the Old Testament, and there were some that were hanging out in sort of a no man's land. You get the story of Abraham's bosom. There's people on this side, people on that side. It's sort of a vision parable. Don't read too much into those. And I'm being careful here, but the other way that you can see this is that in the Old Testament, it seems like Jesus went back to those in spirit form and gave them a chance to still come to him before judgment. Usually, if something happens in the Old Testament, it's a foreshadow of something that's going to happen very similar in the Old Testament. This is where we get the term universal reconciliation from. There's three main views of hell, and there's a minor fourth view, and universal reconciliation is the fourth, that they believe that because that likely happened in the Old Testament, that that's going to happen in the New Testament. And so, does God have the power to convince somebody like my sister in the afterlife before judgment to come back to him? I'm open to that. I call myself hopeful in this area. I think this would be great if it worked this way. But I also don't know that we have all those cards in our Bible to tell us this concretely or not. So I'm just going to call myself, I'm hopeful that this would happen. That leads to universal reconciliation, which isn't pluralism, but it's going to sound, I've talked on this one before, but it's the idea that is God powerful enough that in the afterworld, everybody might actually come to him. I think that would be great. There are scriptures that say every knee will bow. You're familiar with that. That is an option. And I'm hopeful that that is the option. We know that God wants everybody to come to him. He desires that. We know that it's possible. He has the power to do that. But then there's other scriptures that kind of go, I don't know. It doesn't really sound. So I don't land there, but I'm introducing it to you. I don't think it's heretical. I think that that's an option. You guys know I'm a conditionalist there, which means I believe in the Bible when death says death, it just means death. That those that are going to go to hell, it might be fire and brimstone, but when you're sent to hell, death means death. It's not only God is eternal in my mind. Hell isn't a forever torturing device of God. And that's, again, when you get into Calvinism, ETC always is going to frame hell as people are going to be tormented forever. And I can't tell you that they're not going to be. I mean, there are enough places in the Bible that insinuate it could be like that. If that's your view of hell, I'm going to support you in that view of hell. That's not my view of hell. I see hell as conditionalism, meaning that you're probably going to be dropped into a lake of fire, and death means death. And that's what the second death would mean, in my opinion. But that gets into ETC as well. And so when I look at my sister and I say, do I believe that God is going to keep and hold her, or do I believe that she's going to be in eternal damnation? This is going to surprise you, but I'm okay with either one. Now, if my view of hell were being tortured forever, that doesn't sound like the character of God to me. But if that was what it was, I wouldn't be okay with it. This is another tenet of Calvinism why some people have walked away from the faith. And so I believe I'm a conditionalist, not because I want my sister just to die in the end view of this, but I'm a conditionalist because I believe that's what the Bible teaches. That's what I believe the Word of God says. And so I pray for my sister. I talk to her all the time about biblical things. I've already sent her the book on the floor. In fact, when I wrote the first one, it was her in mind that I was writing that book for. And so I'm okay with it. But you know what it looks like if she lives a life where she changes her last name to Sin and is as far, we are as far apart as we could be. I'm wheels off. Jesus is everything. Every little thing in my life is pointed towards Jesus, and everything in her life is pointed the other way. We couldn't be farther apart. Yet I believe that God, in incredible grace and mercy, might just mean death at the end. And if that's what it is for my sister and her family, as hard as it is to say that, I believe that that's a good, gracious God. All right, you guys can explore that one for yourselves. There is one other thing when you're talking about salvation with Calvinism in this regard. So, the people like my sister, even though her fruit looked really good, the other way to structure this in the Bible is what if salvation is only meant, what if it's only intended for those that really fit the view of Christ's picture of discipleship? What if salvation is that high of a mark? This is a hard one. And so some Calvinists can believe this way, that God is going to hold people because they believe that if you get to the place of discipleship, then God is going to hold you. The problem is, what about Judas? What do you do with Judas? Now, I'm not saying Judas wasn't saved. Judas actually could be in heaven, but 99% of theology doesn't believe that, and I'm not sure I do either. It's a hard one. But this is the other way that you can reconcile this, is if you believe the bar of people that get saved is just that high, that the great majority of us aren't going to end up forever with God. And that would help you to reconcile why some people don't really lose their salvation because they never had it. Are you guys all tracking there? That's a hard one. I can't go there, but that's one way that you could be a Calvinist. I'm going to finish on Paul's question, and he's talking about the problem with discipleship. I truly believe that every single person, that God desires you to be a disciple. Now, I have a high mark of discipleship. I believe Jesus and I've said this in this room more than once, that Jesus called 3 times the disciples to come follow me, and he meant it. And the last time it was like, drop your stuff on the beach. Later he says, let the dead bury the dead. Follow me and don't stop following me. Don't go back to your worldly place. Don't go back to this. We live in a world where this is really, really hard. I mean, right now, if I said what it looks like to leave it on the beach discipleship is mean nobody goes to work tomorrow, we're all going to Adeline tomorrow, and we're just gonna live like that forever. That would be hard in this world. I call that circling the wagons biblically. That would be hard, but I don't know. Something tells me if we all got on the same page, like, it might actually work. So coming back to Calvinism, there's this problem with Calvinism that if you are part of the cosmic lottery, essentially a robot made to follow God or not, and nothing that you choose yourself really matters because you don't really make your own choices, then why would I try to be a disciple? Why would I ever go evangelize anybody? Why would Christ spend so much time talking about winning people over to his way? Why would Christ spend so much time with 3 disciples? He's got 3 years of ministry, and he's going to spend all 3 years non-stop discipling. Why would he do that if Calvinism were true? Wouldn't make any sense. There would be no reason. He would have taken the idea that everybody that I need is already mine, so I'm just going to go paint a picture or something like that. But that's not what he calls us to do. And so this idea of evangelism and following him and discipleship, I mean, how many times in the Bible does it say follow him? Over and over and over. I love it that you guys know all means all. Who are supposed to follow him? Well, the intent is all follow him. That's the goal. And we are part of that hand and feet that all follow him. So, to me, Calvinism, and even much of Reformed thinking, if not all of it, seems very contrary to the nature of God and the plan that he's made for us. It doesn't seem like it really fits together. It actually seems rival. It seems against it. And so when I talk about leaving things behind, about taking a mindset to be set apart, to be all in, that doesn't make any sense within the reins of Calvinism. And so, to me, we were ignited as ambassadors. We were part of a royal priesthood from the beginning. And even though the beginning of it says, what does it say? To bless and keep you. I do believe in some words of Calvinism, but I believe in the biblical definitions of them. So I'm not going to have a hard time using the word covenant or predestination or to be kept because I know that there is biblical truth to all of those words. I'm just not going to take on the interpretation that a Reformed person or a Calvinist puts on all that kind of theology. Does that make sense? And I also need to be aware to not let this impact my theology. That when you're listening to Caleb and you're listening to John MacArthur, because boy, this guy just sounds great, he's going to actually teach and preach things that are very contrary. He's the guy that called, just recently, I think it was him, it might have been somebody else, called babies vipers in diapers. I don't know if you heard that or not. Yeah. And that's going back to the evil thing. And so you just have to be ready to identify that. And the best way to be ready is to read your Bible, to call on the Holy Spirit, and be surrounded with people that have a good mindset similar to yours. That doesn't mean not open to whatever the Bible might say. It means grow together. I like to do this. This is a different kind of sermon, but I want you guys to apply this. This time is lost if we don't leave and apply this. And so I want you guys to get to your prayer closets, whether it's putting something, a tallit over your head or just whatever. Close your eyes. You can fold your hands if you want to. Get to your place with the Lord. Pastor Bob already called on the Holy Spirit. I believe that He is here amongst us, dwelling inside of us, igniting fires. But I want you to pray with me right now. And prayers should be personal, but they should also be communal for those around you. And I want to give you just a second to really dwell on some of these things. And I do hope that you guys go back and get really in depth. I pray that this is just the launch pad for you. I do believe that we are all supposed to be representing, manifesting literally who Jesus is to everybody, both in discipleship, to those that are hurt, to those that are broken, to those that need salvation in the Lord. You are the hands and the feet of Jesus to the person next to you. You are a living sacrifice whose very nature isn't in the embodiment of death, as I think Calvinism would tell you, but life. And God's calling for you to live life to the fullest in Him. This shouldn't be met with guilt or shame or condemnation. But it should lead to people that are just saturated with the irresistible character traits of God Himself. The one who creates life before there was death, the one who fosters peace, who replaces chaos with His order, His algorithm, gives balance, wants people to grow, and whose character is good, who is always for you. God gives us this opportunity to partner with Him, to be devoted to this purpose. And I don't think that He wants us to be stuck in the ugliness and the depravity that came in to this world, but to be pictures of the light that look exactly opposite of that. I want you to make a choice today that you're going to receive this to the full extent of what it means to be redeemed, to persevere as a child in the kingdom of God, to be a bright light shining, to claim and live to the fullest, that every day you're going to make decisions that point you toward God, not away from God. Deuteronomy 30 was likely written 6,000 years ago, and it couldn't be any more important to this message. Joshua said, "Choose this day whom you will serve," and Moses echoes the words very similarly when he says, "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, and death and adversity. In that, I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commandments and his statutes, his judgments, that you may live and multiply, that the Lord your God may bless you in the land that you possess. That's my prayer. I pray that in this sacred space, in this set-apart domain of the kingdom of God that's been given to you, passed on to you, I pray that you might represent him well. I pray that you might give life, that you might be the bearer of peace, that you might do away with chaos and confusion and show people the light and the love of Jesus. And that you know that you're not stuck in the mud of all these things that the world tells you you are, or that you're wearing down, but you're free of those, that you've been given complete freedom in Christ to move ahead, and that as you do that and you enter into discipleship with him, that you feel an amazing alignment, connection with the Spirit that you didn't know was possible. Lord, I pray for discernment. I pray for power in you. I pray for commissioning of each and every person here. Lord, I pray that we might go forth out of this place and know what you have designed us for and called us to, and how you have kept us to walk in that way in you, and that we won't be held back by what the world says or even this Calvinism might say of us, Lord, but Father, that we know that we are yours and that you have big plans for each one of us, Lord. Help us to live out the full calling in the kingdom that you have for us. Amen.
Now please receive the blessing that the Father has for you. He calls you beloved, the ones that are greatly loved. And he and I both desire that you experience prosperity and his type of divine health. And the way this happens is by allowing your soul to prosper through intimacy with him and knowledge of his word. I love you, and I'll see you again soon.